Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. To Mrs. Saville, England. St. Petersburg, December 11th, 17 -- You will rejoice to hear that no disaster has accompanied the commencement of an enterprise which you have regarded with such evil forebodings. I arrived here yesterday. A cold northern breeze plays upon my cheeks and braces my nerves, as if the air itself travelled from the very regions toward which I advance, and brought me a foretaste of those icy climes. Do you understand this feeling? When that wind touches me, my daydreams grow more fervent and vivid. I try in vain to be persuaded that the pole is the seat of frost and desolation. It presents itself to my imagination as the very region of beauty and delight. There, Margaret, the sun is forever visible, its broad disk skirting the horizon and diffusing a perpetual splendor. And sailing over a calm sea, we may be wafted to a land surpassing in wonders and beauty every region yet discovered on the habitable globe. What may not be expected in a country of eternal light? If these conjectures be false, still you cannot contest the inestimable benefit I shall confer by discovering a passage near the pole to those countries which at present demand so many months to reach, or by ascertaining the secret of the magnet, which, if possible at all, can be effected only by an undertaking such as mine. These reflections have dispelled the agitation with which I began my letter. Nothing tranquilizes the mind so much as a steady purpose, a point on which the soul may fix its intellectual eye. My purpose is fixed as fate. Yet let me confess a want which I have bitterly felt. I have no friend. When I am glowing with the enthusiasm of success, there will be none to participate my joy. If I am assailed by disappointment, no one will endeavor to sustain me. I shall commit my thoughts to paper, it is true, but that is a poor medium for the communication of feeling. I desire the company of a man who could sympathize with me, whose eyes would reply to mine. You may deem me romantic, my dear sister, but I bitterly feel the want of a friend. I am, meanwhile, enchanted with this place. The streets of Petersburg are wide and clean. The Neva, though choked with ice, glitters beneath a pallid sun. The churches lift their domes like bubbles of light, and the people, wrapped in furs, move with a diligence that shames my indolent countrymen. Their sledges fly over the snow with a grace that has something of poetry in it. I am studying with all the earnestness of which I am capable the languages and the mathematics that may hereafter become useful. Yet the heart, when it once has fixed upon a great object, refuses to be fed with lesser food. Archangel, March 28th. Time passes slowly here amidst frost and snow. Yet a second step is taken. I have hired a vessel and am occupied in collecting sailors. Those whom I have already engaged appear to be men of whom I can judge favorably, hardy, obedient, dauntless. My lieutenant, in particular, is a man of wonderful courage and enterprise, desirous of advancement in his profession, and, under unpolished manners, retaining the noblest endowments of humanity. The master of the ship is remarkable for gentleness and for the mildness of his discipline. I cannot overcome an intense distaste to that brutality which is usually exercised on board ship, and it seemed Fortune herself had set in my path a commander whose authority is obedience born of love. Yet there is a want which nothing supplies. I have no friend. I have sufficient leisure to dedicate myself to contemplation, and yet no one to whom I may communicate the results. I desire one who will approve or amend my plans, not a flatterer, but a companion, not a dependent, but a brother. Do not suppose, because I complain a little, that I waver in my design. The winter has been severe, but the spring promises well. The season is early. I may sail sooner than I expected. I shall do nothing rashly. You know me well enough to confide in my prudence when the safety of others is committed to my care. Often, as I pace the quay, the river gleaming like steel and the long pine forest black against a sky of pearl, I feel that my soul is fit for high achievements. Why should I doubt? Have I not inured my body to hardship, accompanying the whale fishers to the North Sea, enduring cold, famine, thirst, and want of sleep? I have often worked harder than the common sailors during the day, and devoted my nights to the study of mathematics, the theory of medicine, and those branches of physical science from which a naval adventurer might derive the greatest advantage. Twice I hired myself as an undermate in a Greenland whaler, and acquitted myself to admiration. If I now fail, it will be through no fault of preparation. July 7th. We are well advanced on our voyage. This letter will reach England by a merchantman homeward bound from Archangel. I am in good spirits. My men are bold and apparently firm of purpose. The floating sheets of ice that continually pass, though they foretell the dangers of the region to which we are hastening, do not dismay them. The sun is not so warm as with you, yet the southern gales, which blow us speedily toward those shores I so ardently desire to attain, breathe a renovating warmth I had not expected. No incidents have occurred that would make a figure in a letter. To one who has lived much in imagination, the absence of event is itself an event. The mind, deprived of outward objects, constructs its own pageants and fills the sea with phantoms. August 5th. So strange an accident has happened that I cannot forbear recording it, though it is very probable you will see me before these papers can come into your possession. Last Monday we were nearly surrounded by ice, which closed in the ship on all sides, scarcely leaving her the sea room in which she floated. A very thick fog compassed us round. We lay to, hoping that some change would take place in the atmosphere. About 2 o'clock, the mist cleared away, and we beheld, stretched out in every direction, vast and irregular plains of ice which seemed to have no end. Some of the crew groaned. My own mind grew watchful with anxious thoughts, when a strange sight diverted our solicitude. We perceived a low carriage, fixed on a sledge, and drawn by dogs pass toward the north at the distance of half a mile. A being, which had the shape of a man, but apparently of gigantic stature, sat in the sledge and guided the dogs. We watched him with our telescopes until he was lost among the inequalities of the ice. The appearance excited unqualified wonder. We were, as we believed, many hundred miles from land, yet this apparition denoted that it might be nearer than we supposed, or else that the ocean nourished inhabitants of whom we had not dreamed. About 2 hours afterwards, we heard the ground sea, and before night the ice broke and freed our ship. Yet we lay to until morning, fearing to encounter in the dark the loose masses which float about after the breaking up of the ice. I profited by the interval to rest for a few hours. At dawn, going upon deck, I found the sailors busied on one side of the vessel, apparently speaking to someone in the sea. It was, in fact, a sledge like that we had seen before, which had drifted toward us on a large fragment of ice. Only one dog remained alive. Within lay a human being whom the sailors were persuading to enter the vessel. He was not, as the other traveller had seemed, a savage of some undiscovered island, but a European. When I appeared, the master said, "Here is our captain. He will not allow you to perish on the open sea." On perceiving me, the stranger addressed me in English, though with a foreign accent. "Before I come on board, will you have the kindness to inform me whither you are bound?" You may conceive my astonishment at such a question from a man on the brink of destruction. I replied that we were upon a voyage of discovery towards the northern pole. Upon hearing this, he appeared satisfied and consented to come on board. Good God, Margaret, if you had seen the man who thus capitulated for his safety, your surprise would have been boundless. His limbs were nearly frozen, his body dreadfully emaciated by fatigue and suffering. His eyes, when they opened upon kindness, were lighted with a beam of sweetness I have never seen equalled, but when left to themselves, sank into a gloom more awful than rage. 2 days passed before he could speak. I assigned him my own cabin. I attended him as far as duty permitted, and gradually he recovered sufficient strength to converse. I confess to you that my heart, so long in want of a brother, fastened upon him as upon a treasure. He possesses a cultivated mind, refined manners, and a greatness of spirit which shines even through the wreck of his frame. He inquired eagerly whether we had seen a man of gigantic stature. When I told him of the traveller we had watched upon the ice, he pressed my hand with a convulsive energy. "He is the man I pursue," said he. Later, when we were alone, he looked upon me with an expression I cannot forget. "You seek for knowledge and wisdom, as I once did, and I ardently hope that the gratification of your wishes may not be a serpent to sting you, as mine has been." Seeing in me the very madness that had undone him, this stranger, Victor Frankenstein, resolved to recount his history, that I might deduct a moral from his fate. When the wind was hushed, and the ship lay still as if she listened, I drew near his couch and set down his words as he spoke them. I am by birth a Genovese. My family is one of the most distinguished of that republic. My ancestors had been for many years councillors and syndics, and my father had filled several public situations with honour and reputation. He married late. His bride had been the object of his earliest love, Caroline, whom misfortune had rendered an orphan, and whom his benevolence had rescued from penury. My parents, thus united by gratitude as well as affection, cherished one design, to make their child happy, and I, their firstborn, was their plaything and their idol. No human being could have passed a happier childhood than myself. We were not rich in pomp, but in goodness. Our house was the shrine of domestic affections. Among the gifts of fate there came to us a little treasure, Elizabeth Lavenza. Whether you call her my cousin, as we did, or a foundling of noble birth, as I afterward learned, she became to me my more than sister, the beautiful and adored companion of all my occupations and my pleasures. Her disposition was at once calm and concentrated. Mine was impetuous and loud. Where I was ardent and inquisitive, she was gentle and reflective. And thus we drew from each other what each lacked. Henry Clerval, the son of a merchant, joined us in friendship. He loved enterprise and high romance. He made tales of chivalry live. He taught me to prize virtue not only as a word, but as an action. With these two, I trod my first years in a paradise of affection. But even in that paradise omens were written, though none knew to read them. I had a passion for natural philosophy, or rather for its marvellous aspect. A chance volume of Cornelius Agrippa fell into my hands. I devoured Paracelsus and Albertus Magnus, and though my father once, with a careless glance, called Agrippa sad trash, the very contempt sharpened my appetite. A thunderstorm came to our mountains. A tree, an old and beautiful oak, was struck before my eyes and reduced to thin ribbons of wood. The appearance of the tree excited my admiration and astonishment. What remained resembled the work of a nearly invisible hand that had devoured it. From that hour I desired to know the cause and the secret of this tremendous power. I longed madly, ignorantly, to discover the principle of life itself. At 17, Elizabeth's gentle tears accompanying me, I departed for the university at Ingolstadt. The change, though benevolent in intention, cut me from those ties which might have tempered my ambition. At the university, Monsieur Krempe, a professor of natural philosophy, ridiculed my cherished alchemists and told me I had wasted my time. But Monsieur Waldman, the professor of chemistry, whose manner was the very model of kindness, spoke of the modern philosophers with enthusiasm. They had penetrated into the recesses of nature and shown how she works in her hiding places. They had acquired new and almost unlimited powers. From that hour, I determined to enter the lists. I visited the dissecting room. I studied anatomy. I learned the causes of life. More fearfully, I learned how the blood pauses and the life goes out. To examine the causes of life, we must first have recourse to death. The grave yielded up its secrets, and where others beheld only corruption, I imagined a principle to restore animation to lifeless matter. I cannot describe the minutiae of my toil without a shudder. For nearly 2 years I laboured to bestow animation upon lifeless matter. I assembled a frame of gigantic stature, that the intricacies of minuter parts might be spared me. I selected his features as beautiful, thinking the whole would partake of the beauty of the parts. I collected the instruments of life about me. I learned to command, or seem to command, a certain power which I shall not name. Who shall conceive the horrors of my secret toil as I dabbled among the unhallowed damps of the grave? My cheek grew pale with study, my person emaciated. The wormy charnel house became my workshop, the night my counsellor, the moon, a ghastly witness. It was on a dreary night of November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. The rain pattered dismally against the panes. The candle burned dim. The lifeless thing lay extended at my feet. I applied the spark. It opened its dull yellow eye. The muscles and joints were convulsed. Breath forced its way between the straight black lips. The dream vanished. Horror and disgust filled my heart. The yellow skin scarcely covered the work of muscles and arteries. His lustrous hair and pearly teeth made but a more horrid contrast with his watery eyes and shriveled complexion. Unable to endure the aspect of the being I had created, I rushed out, and, in the courtyard, I passed the night in a perturbation that bordered on madness. Returning at dawn, I beheld the wretch, the miserable monster whom I had created, lifting the bed curtain. His jaws opened. He muttered inarticulate sounds. A grin wrinkled his cheeks. Again I fled. Heaven sent Henri Clerval, newly arrived. He pressed my hand. He brought letters from Elizabeth and my father. He restored me to the recollection of affection and duty. But when I attempted to reply, the form of the monster rose before me. Fever seized me. I raved. For months I lay upon the threshold of delirium. Henry watched over me with a patience that made him less my friend than my guardian angel. Spring, that lovely season which sheds health and vigour on all, brought me also healing. I walked with Henry in the streets. We visited the professors. I resolved to turn from my former pursuits. The mere remembrance of them excited horror. My own tranquillity was a transient illusion. A letter came from my father. Its seal I broke with trembling. William is dead. Those words shrieked from the page. My sweet brother, a laughing boy, half clothed in innocence, had been found lifeless near Plainpalais. I hastened home. The mountains, which once had been the seats of delight and inspiration, looked now like spectres. The gates of Geneva were closed. I wandered in the Plainpalais. The storm raged. Suddenly a flash of lightning displayed before me the figure of a man of gigantic stature across whose limbs the lightning played. A flash discovered him to me. Another closed him in darkness. I recognized him. I knew that I had armed the murderer of my brother. But the criminal stood not at the bar. A gentle girl, Justine Moritz, who had lived in our house, was accused. A miniature of my mother, which William had worn, was found in her pocket. Her confusion, her attempts to justify herself, and the prepossessions of the magistrate conspired against her. I knew the truth, yet I dared not speak it. Who would credit such a tale? I feared for my own liberty. I feared for my father's heart. I feared madness. Justine confessed falsely, misled by terror and by those who taught her to seek absolution by submission. She died, innocent. The tortures of the accused did not equal mine. I had been the author of unalterable evils. To nature I fled for consolation. To her I had often owed a charm that banished care. I wandered up the valley of Chamonix, past the bridge of Pelissier, and, having gained the summit of Montanvert, I commanded the Mer de Glace. A sea rolled in waves, but frozen. The scene, sublime and magnificent, almost soothed me. Then, moving with a speed that mocked pursuit, I beheld the being approach. I called him devil. I bade him avoid me. I promised to trample him to dust. He raised his hand. "All men hate the wretched," said he. "How then must I be hated, who am miserable beyond all living things? Yet you, my Creator, detest and spurn me. Hear me." He spoke with a reason which, joined to the expression of an agony not as easily feigned as deformity is fashioned, compelled me to listen. "Listen to me. Then, if you can, destroy the work of your hands." We entered a hut. He sat by the fire, and there, with a voice at first broken, afterwards assured, he recounted the history of his sensations and his soul. I awoke, and the light oppressed me. Darkness was dear to me, for it comforted and did not burn. I felt hunger, thirst, cold. I found berries and a brook. I learned that fire warms and also tortures. I thrust my hand into the flames and withdrew it with a cry. The sight of man was my terror. The first village I approached answered me with stones and shrieks. I fled to a forest. Later I discovered a hovel joined to a small cottage. Through a chink I beheld the inhabitants, an old man, blind but sweet of voice, his son Felix, industrious and high-minded, his daughter Agatha, patient and tender. Poverty, which degrades the vicious, seemed to make these more gentle. I became their unpaid servant. By night I gathered wood and placed it at their door. I cleared their path from snow. In serving them, I learned the nature of service and conceived an affection which was love in everything but its recompense. I learned their language by listening. When Safi, an Arabian, arrived, she, who had been promised to Felix, and whose story, with its mixture of affection and injustice, I gleaned by degrees, the lessons of their speech began anew, and as she learned, I learned with her. A satchel of books fell into my hands, Plutarch's Lives, which lifted me to conceive virtue in action, Werther, which opened to me the abyss of the heart, and Milton's Paradise Lost, which I read as history rather than as poem, measuring myself against its characters. Like Adam, I was apparently united by no link to any other being in existence. Yet unlike him, I had no creator who delighted in my existence. I found also your pocketbook, my creator, with notes that taught me the loathsome detail of my formation. Hateful day when I received life, I cried, accursed creator. Yet I hoped. I resolved to reveal myself to the old man, who could not be prejudiced by his eyes. I entered at a moment when his children were absent. I spoke. He received me with that courtesy which is blind to deformity. He promised to intercede for me with his family. But they returned. Their horror was violent. Felix, in a transport, struck me and drove me forth. I fled. When I returned, the cottage was deserted. I set fire to the ruin. The light was a poor substitute for the warmth I had lost. I journeyed to Geneva to seek you. On the road I encountered a child. His limbs were beautiful. His countenance spoke of that careless tyranny which belongs to innocence. I seized him, thinking to educate him in my virtues. He struggled, called me monster, and, in his fright, named himself Frankenstein. Rage, which had slept while hope lived, shook me. I strangled him. The miniature I found upon him I placed in the dress of a sleeping girl, so that she might be condemned. Do not misunderstand me. I accuse myself. I am malicious because I am miserable. Yet even in my malice there was method. I would compel you to hear me. Hear then my demand. I am alone and miserable. Man will not associate with me, but one as deformed and horrible as myself would not deny herself to me. You must create a female for me, with whom I can live in the interchange of those sympathies necessary for my being. Grant this, and I will quit the neighbourhood of man forever. I will live harmlessly in those vast wilds where the sun is more a companion than any face. He spoke with a persuasion that was logic and passion in equal measure. I, shaken by compassion and by a sense of a strange justice, was I not, after all, the author of his woes? Consented to his demand. I gave him my promise. I returned to Geneva. The thought of my vow sat on me like a weight of iron. Elizabeth's letters were full of tender fears and gentle counsel. My father, who loved repose and order, urged my marriage. I postponed all. With Henry, I travelled to England. The green of her meadows and the mildness of her skies were like a reproach to my spirit. For what is gentle in nature is terrible when the heart is unquiet. We visited Oxford, admired her towers and her river, and then we passed into Scotland, where, parting from Henry, I sought the Orkney Islands. There, in a desolate corner beaten by everlasting winds, I hired a miserable hut and set up my laboratory again. The sea roared as if it too disliked my purpose. The ground was scant of vegetation. The inhabitants, poor in comfort, rich in curiosity, watched my motions with a mistrust I could not blame. I began, but if the first crime had been born of ignorance disguised as ambition, this second labour was haunted by knowledge. What if she I created should refuse the compact I intended for her? What if she, although formed like him, should turn in loathing from him? What if their union, happy for themselves, should propagate a race of devils? What if I should deliver over future ages to a terror that would never sleep? My hands faltered. My soul became a theatre in which the prompter whispered caution, while the actor shouted resolve. One night, raising my eyes from the half-finished form, I beheld, at the casement, the fiend's face. A grin distorted it into hope. In a transport of passion and fear, I tore the second work to pieces. He uttered a howl such as one might fancy the last agony of an animal execrating its slayer. "You are my creator," he cried, "but I am your master. Obey." Then, with a calm that frightened me more than fury, "I shall be with you on your wedding night." At dawn, I collected the remnants of my miserable labour, carried them to sea, and cast them into the waves. A storm arose. The skiff was driven upon an Irish shore. I was seized, accused of murder, and brought before Mr. Kirwin, a magistrate whose compassion was as large as his authority. Being desired to view the corpse, I saw Henry Clerval. The black marks upon his neck confessed the hand that had grasped him. I fell senseless. Illness held me for 2 months. When I awoke to reason, Mr. Kerwin had collected depositions that proved my absence at the time of the murder. I was acquitted. My father came to me, the sight of his hair whitening with grief. The gentlest of men, whose life had been a perpetual act of benevolence, wounded me more than chains. We returned to Geneva. Yet in Geneva there awaited me that sentence whose words had long sounded in my ears. I shall be with you on your wedding night. I resolved to marry Elizabeth at once, to arm myself, and to stand prepared. If the blow must fall, let it fall on me. We were married. The day shone fair. The lake, which had been to us a mirror of childhood, looked now like an eye that could not close. We departed to a villa on its shore. I paced the gallery, pistol in hand. I never thought to remain where I most ought to have remained. A shriek, Elizabeth's, rang through the house. I rushed into the chamber. She lay upon the bed, lifeless and inanimate, the marks upon her neck eloquent as handwriting. At the window I saw the fiend's face. He pointed with a grin at the corpse and vanished into the night. My father, unable to survive such a blow, soon died. I stood alone upon the earth. I went to the magistrate. He believed me to the extent to which a man believes what he cannot conceive. But what arm of law can seize a being who moves with the silence of night and the speed of the wind? I devoted myself to one object, the destruction of my adversary. He fled northward. He left tokens to guide me and taunts to inflame me. Words cut upon bark, traces upon rocks, food left where I might find it. He nourished me that I might follow and be miserable. Through fields and rivers, across the vast steppes, into the snows of Russia, I pursued. Often I lost his track, then some mark would restore it. At a miserable hut, a letter awaited me. My reign is not yet over. He crossed the ice in a sledge. I procured another. Dogs died, men deserted. I continued. The sun circled above the horizon without setting. The cold was a living enemy. At length, faint and nearly exhausted, I was taken up by your ship. Here Frankenstein's voice would often fail. Yet, when silence obliged him, his eyes continued the tale. He charged me, should he die, to execute the vengeance he could not. He warned me against the ambition, which had been a serpent to sting him. Meanwhile, the ice held us. The men, who had borne danger with patience, demanded that, should a passage open, we return south. I addressed them. I spoke of honour and of fame, but I read in their faces that fear which is not cowardice, but prudence. At length, a route opened. I promised to return. My friend, shall I not call him so, approved. Seek happiness in tranquillity, he said, and avoid ambition, even if it be only the apparently innocent one of distinguishing yourself. He pressed my hand. His voice faltered. Before the day had completed its circle, he died. I kept watch beside the body. The night, which here is a pale day, lay like a shroud, the ice without ground upon itself like a distant organ. While I sat thus, a sound, like fabric drawn across a rough edge, disturbed me. I turned, and beheld within the cabin the being whom we had pursued to the ends of the earth. He stood over the corpse of his maker. His countenance was wrinkled with anguish. When he saw me, he started back, then advanced with a gesture of supplication rather than menace. That also is my victim, he said, pointing to the body. In his murder, my crimes are consummated. He confessed the whole sum of his guilt and the misery that had been its root and its fruit. He spoke of remorse as of a fire that eats without flame. I, moved by a pity which reproved itself as it was born, would have urged him to endure and in endurance to atone. But he shook his head with a melancholy that did not ask for comfort. What remains of this strange and terrible history I set down in his very words, and I add nothing to them. But it is true that I am a wretch. I have murdered the lovely and the helpless. I have strangled the innocent as they slept and grasped too. Death his throat who never injured me or any other living thing. I have devoted my Creator, the select specimen of all that is worthy of love and admiration among men, to misery. I have pursued him even to that irremediable ruin. There he lies, white and cold in death. You hate me, but your abhorrence cannot equal that with which I regard myself. I look on the hands which executed the deed. I think on the heart in which the imagination of it was conceived, and long for the moment when these hands will meet my eyes, when that imagination will haunt my thoughts no more. Fear not that I shall be the instrument of future mischief. My work is nearly complete. Neither yours nor any man's death is needed to consummate the series of my being and accomplish that which must be done. But it requires my own. Do not think that I shall be slow to perform this. Sacrifice I shall quit your vessel on the ice raft which brought me thither, and shall seek the most northern extremity of the globe. I shall collect my funeral pile and consume to ashes this miserable frame, that its remains may afford no light to any curious and unhallowed wretch who would create such another as I have been. I shall die. I shall no longer feel the agonies which now consume me, or be the prey of feelings unsatisfied yet unquenched. He is dead who called me into being, and when I shall be no more, the very remembrance of us both will speedily vanish. I shall no longer see the sun or stars, or feel the winds play on my cheeks. Light of feeling and sense will pass away, and in this condition must I find my happiness. Some years ago, when the images which this world affords first opened upon me, when I felt the cheering warmth of summer and heard the rustling of the leaves and the warbling of the birds, and these were all to me, I should have wept to die. Now it is my only consolation. Polluted by crimes and torn by the bitterest remorse, where can I find rest but in death? Farewell. I leave you, and in you the last of humankind whom these eyes will ever behold. Farewell, Frankenstein. If thou wert yet alive, and yet cherished a desire of revenge against me, it would be better, satiated in my life than in my destruction. But it was not so. Thou didst seek my extinction, that I might not cause greater wretchedness. And if yet, in some mode unknown to me, thou hadst not ceased to think and feel, thou wouldst not desire against me a vengeance greater than that which I feel. Blasted as thou wert, my agony was still superior to thine, for the bitter sting of remorse will not cease to rankle in my wounds until death shall close them forever. But soon, he cried with sad and solemn enthusiasm, I shall die, and what I now feel be no longer felt. Soon these burning miseries will be extinct. I shall ascend my funeral pile triumphantly and exult in the agony of the torturing flames. The light of that conflagration will fade away. My ashes will be swept into the sea by the winds. My spirit will sleep in peace, or if it thinks, it will not surely think thus. Farewell. He sprang from the cabin window as he said this, upon the ice raft, which lay close to the vessel. He was soon borne away by the waves and, lost in darkness and distance,